Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this Gaming.com video, we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to be starting things out with the Ryzen 7 3000 series chips. I've got a question for you. Would you like more cores? Well, the rumours have it that we will be seeing 12 to 16 CPU cores, not threads, just to emphasise, for the mainstream parts in 2019. It doesn't need me to tell you this, but that is absolutely crazy. And then we're going to move over to Nvidia and yet more rumours on the Geforce 1180s or 2080s, whatever you want to call them, because we will be seeing them equipped with GDDR6 memory, at least according to rumours that Nvidia have struck up a deal with SK Hynix. But as I said, first things first, AMD and the 16-core Ryzen 7 series. AMD have already let us see some of their plans for the Zen microprocessor architectures up until 2020. Of course, the previous generation with Zen, which is built on 14nm, that was the Ryzen 1700, 1700Xs, you get the idea. Then we had Zen Plus, which of course is the current generation. The 2700, for example, is built upon that, and that is on a 12nm process. Then we'll have Zen 2. The design for this is complete and improves on Zen in multiple dimensions. And then we'll see Zen 3, which is built on a 7nm plus architecture. That design is currently on track. There is a word for the CPU roadmap, and it is aggressive. I believe the thing that puts an exclamation point on the word aggressive is the fact that we already see rumours that AMD are going to be skipping 5nm and indeed move down to GlobalFoundries 3nm. This, however, will most likely be for Zen 5. There is, however, another rumour that's going around, and this one is primarily the focus of the video, and that is that the Ryzen 3000 series will indeed sport 12 to 16 cores. Now, just to clarify, this is not for Threadripper, because, well, if it was Threadripper, that's not really a surprise at all, although it does lead me to question what the hell we're going to be seeing for Threadripper, but that's probably a topic for a different video. But the website WCCF Tech are telling us that they have sources that could place the number of CPU cores to 16 on the AM4 socket, but according to them, they believe the figure is going to be closer to 12. Of course, the original Zen had the first design, so we can't talk about any of its improvements, but let's just say they were numerous compared to AMD's previous CPUs. Then of course we saw Zen Plus, which had higher clock speeds, lower latency, better memory controller. We've discussed that ad nauseum by now. Then Zen 2, of course, once again, is going to have multi-dimensional improvements. Now, multi-dimensional is a very broad term. Multi-dimensional could mean anything from power efficiency, clock speeds, cache improvements, so you could take that as lower latency cache, higher amounts of cache, or indeed core count increases. Of course, how the cores are going to be segregated and whether we're going to see some differences in how a CCX is currently put together, I don't know. Just for a quick refresher course, refresh, CPUs, oh god. Anywho, a CCX, of course, is 4 cores, which creates one CCX. So if you were to take, let's say, the 1700 or the 2700 as an example, you see 2 CCXs which come together. And that, of course, forms the basis of the processor. You can almost think of them as, well, Lego. So there's a couple of questions. Let's take, for example, the 1950X, which of course is the current high-end Threadripper. We can presume that that's going to be replaced pretty quickly with the 2950, although the exact release date isn't known. We do know it's going to be fairly early in the second half of this year. Regardless, semantics of course, we do know that the 2950 and the 1950 have 16 cores, 32 threads, so we can, by a very simple math, say that that's 4 CCXs, 4, 8, 12, 16. You get the idea. But does that mean that that design is going to be the same for Zen 2? For example, they could just increase the number of cores per CCX. An example of that, of course, would be 6 cores per CCX. So 6 and another 6 comes 12. But of course, that doesn't then quite factor in how a 16-core processor could be rumoured, so perhaps they're just increasing the number of CCXs. It's possible that just simply on the die shrink, could possibly do the trick. In fact, there was an article that was released mid-ish March where GlobalFoundries told us multiple different things regarding 7nm. And they said that, quote, 7nm enables 2.7 times smaller dies and, quote, 5 GHz CPUs. To put that into some level of context, at least if you take GlobalFoundries numbers, which, well, that's all we've got for now, that means that you will see a 213mm squared 14nm Zeppelin die, also known of course as AMD's Ryzen 1000 series, just clarifying the 8 core, that would be the 1700X, brought down from 213 square mm down to just 80. How power consumption would work is a bit difficult to know as well. Supposedly, the GlobalFoundries 7LP platform has a 40% performance boost over 14nm and a 55-ish% power reduction, with the total power from 14nm down to 7nm being about 60%. Once again, this is according to GlobalFoundries themselves. It's very difficult to do a full analysis on this simply because we don't know all the facts. There's a couple of quandaries I've got. For example, what about memory bandwidth? Now, folks may know if you're regular subscribers of the channel. If not, become one. Hint, hint, nudge, 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 nudge. But we recently conducted some memory speed tests for the Ryzen 2000 series, the 2700X, and there's a lot more testing coming. That's all I'm going to say. IPC testing, SMT enable. Let's just put it this way: a lot of testing. There's a reason that the videos are taking a while, and let's just say that I'm probably going slightly insane by now with the number of times that I've seen various benchmarks like Rise of the Tomb Raider running. But they are coming, and there's an awful lot of testing. That's all I'm going to say. But regarding the memory clock speeds, we saw, of course, that really low memory clock speeds, 2133 and 2400 MHz. Naturally, they kind of hurt performance, but once you start going around the 2800 MHz, generally speaking, games do okay, unless you're running like really low resolution, 1080p or 720p, then you can certainly start seeing the GPU no longer being the limiting factor, and occasionally the CPU performance, especially if you go to 3266 or above, really starts to become noticeable. But in non-gaming applications, memory bandwidth is still quite a factor. Me point being, in case you've not probably guessed where I'm going with this, if you are doubling the number of cores, memory bandwidth is going to be a bit of a problem, surely, if we've only got a dual channel design. So the ways I can see around that are a much more robust caching system. Possibly we could also see improvements on, for example, fetching the next instruction, queuing systems, perhaps better thread scheduling, perhaps larger caches as well. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we did see that. Technically, they might have the room if they're going with just 12 cores, but obviously I'm just guessing because no one really knows at the moment. Perhaps large level 1 data or instruction caches could perhaps see a bump as well. It's too difficult to really know. I wouldn't be surprised, however, no matter what AMD did, ultimately they can't make the caches like, 128 megabytes. That's just not really feasible, or even larger. So me point being that eventually you're going to farm, you're going to hit enough cache misses where eventually the data is going to have to be farmed out to DDR4 memory. So there's a couple of options there. The first is that they could go with an increased number of channels, but then surely backwards compatibility won't be a thing. I will be curious to know how backwards compatibility is going to be a thing. I mean, from what AMD have told us, they do wish to keep AM4, which of course is the current socket, which the 300 series and the 400 series boards are backwardly compatible. For example, you can put a 2700X in a B350, or you can put a 1700X in an X470, just for example, and it will work just fine, assuming you do a BIOS update. So it's a bit difficult to know at the moment how AMD are going to be playing this. Naturally, this also leads us to a couple of other questions which I'm going to very briefly touch on. The first one is what the hell is going to happen with Threadripper. I would suspect that means Threadripper is going to be at the least on the high end, 24 cores, perhaps 32 cores. And we can also suspect that if AMD do keep dual channel memory, then obviously quad channel memory, as well as some other functionality, they could, for example, increase the number of PCIe lanes, which is obviously a certainty, they have done in the past, plus other bits and pieces as well to really separate the HEDT from the mainstream. So obviously if you've got, let's say, your 2019, I don't know what the hell it's going to be called, but let's just say it's the 3700X paired with dual channel memory. Let's say, for sake of argument, you're running at mid 3000 megahertz, let's say 3266 or above, then you are still not going to have memory bandwidth of someone who is running the, I'm assuming it's going to be the 3950X with quad channel memory, because obviously quad channel memory equals yum, lots of memory bandwidth. The other question, of course, is, well, the obvious one, what the hell are Intel going to be doing? We do know that 10nm is going to be tentative for 2020, possibly a little bit beforehand, and Epic is doing fairly well when you look at the server markets. I mean, ultimately, yes, us buying a 1700X or whatever from AMD is certainly good, and I'm sure AMD appreciate you buying it, just like Intel appreciate you buying it, but there's a bit of a difference between you and I buying a couple of CPUs here and there throughout the year to, let's say, the number of processors that Amazon will gobble up, or Google will gobble up, or any of the cloud-based server market. And there's a reason that that thing is like, I don't even know the value of it now. I think the last time I looked it was like $35 or $40 billion. Absolutely crazy. And of course it's going to continue to escalate very quickly. So it's not just that AMD are producing these chips for us, but they're ramping them up for, of course, the server market, where they're very much hoping to be competitive. Anywho, and I feel that that brings us to the last topic for today, and that, of course, is GDDR6 and Nvidia. So the graphics architecture that Nvidia are going to be coming out with Geforce Volta is just completely and utterly unknown at the moment. Is it going to be Volta? Is it going to be Ampere? Is it going to be Turing? Is it going to be the 1180s? Is it going to be the 2080s? No one really 100% knows. There's a lot of rumours, but a rumour does not equate to reality. There are multiple sources, however, that tells us that the GTX 1180, if you believe that name, apparently it's not locked in yet. The 1180 Founders Edition is going to appear in July, so just a couple of months into the future. However, production for GDDR6 is said to be one of the reasons that these cards are being held back. Of course, we can also say other things, for example, memory prices and lack of competition for AMD, but I think it's fair to say that GDDR6 memory is definitely one of the reasons. There are definitely some differences, key differences from GDDR6 to GDDR5. For example, we have a 180 ball grid array that's up from 170 from the previous GDDR5. So once again, 180 for R6, 170 for R5. That increases a greater throughput because of the additional pins. We also see them operate faster, so they can go up to 16 gigabits per second and ship in both 8 gigabit and 16 GB densities. So essentially we're looking at double the density compared to GDDR5, and in addition to that, we will see lower power consumption as well. According to SK Hynix, GDDR6 is going to pull just 1.35 volts. However, a new rumour is telling us that yes, Nvidia will indeed be using the GTX GeForce cards alongside GDDR6, and apparently this news, which is a supply deal between themselves and SK Hynix, so basically SK Hynix and Nvidia, this has actually increased the Korean manufacturer's stock price by 6%. Of course, there are multiple questions we've got here, because GDDR6 presumably is going to be kind of expensive to produce at the start. We don't know what yields are going to be. It's possible that GDDR6 will be just for some of the very high-end SKUs. For example, it could be for the 1180 and the 1170 could possibly use GDDR5, but then of course you'd have to have a different memory controller, so I'm not exactly sure about that. It's possible that R6 could be used on the 1170s and the 1180s, and then anything below that of course would be R5X or R5. We don't 100% know. But in theory, at least, we could still see a 256-bit memory-wide interface, and because you're seeing a drastic increase in clock speed on the memory, that would, of course, see a major improvement in performance. For example, you could have R6 memory run at 14 Gbps. That would be just operating at 1.35 volts. So right there, you're running at 3000-ish Gbps more, and you're using less power. 12 Gbps could just take 1.25 volts. So for example, they could run at 14 for the 1180, and then the 1170 could just run at 12, which would certainly be a good idea. And also, because of the densities as well, they wouldn't have to have a particularly wide memory bus, and because of the clock speed, they also wouldn't need to worry too much. So it's kind of like a catch-22, if you will, because one of the theories is you could use R6, have a much smaller memory bus, and then have enough memory bandwidth to where you wouldn't need to build in the complexity of, let's say, a GDDR5, because obviously, once again, you've got considerably higher memory clock speeds, and you've got a larger amount of RAM per chip. So it's a bit up in the air at the moment. With all of that said, I think that's just about it for this video. So it's been a bit of a rambly type of video, but there you go. I've missed talking to you all. With that said, normal stuff. If you want to, you know, like, share, comment, subscribe, that would be amazing. There's going to be a lot of content coming up on the channel over the next several weeks, of course. A lot of reviews, a lot of analysis, and a lot of extra bits and pieces. I'm going to be very glad when I've finished a couple of projects that I'm working on, quite frankly, because they've taken an awful lot of time, but I am really happy that I've kept them back, because I think that they're going to be more than worth it. With all of that said, thank you very much for watching. Have a great day. Bye for now.